Bayou Lafourche, once an arm of the mighty Mississippi, crawls through the center of the Barataria and Terrebonne basins, connecting the two at the heart. Over 100 miles in length, this beautiful and elegant bayou is the common thread that links many communities before emptying into the Gulf of Mexico. The rich waterway, its culture, its history, mystique, and charm are all cause for celebration. But the threats to this imperiled homeland are cause for alarm. The Barataria-Terrebonne estuary lies in southeast Louisiana, one of the nation's largest. It is a biologically rich ecosystem of more than 4 million acres, spanning an area from the Atchafalaya River on the west to the Mississippi on the east. The estuary provides important habitat for endangered species such as bald eagles, fur bearers, waterfowl, and migratory birds. More than 500 million pounds of fish and shellfish are harvested annually from its waters, nearly 20% of the nation's commercial seafood catch. Barataria-Terrebonne also supplies about 15% of the nation's oil production, providing billions of dollars to the economy. And it is home to more than 500,000 people. Since Bayou Lafourche runs through the heart of the Barataria-Terrebonne estuary, many of its challenges echo those of the entire estuary. A distributary of the Mississippi River, Bayou Lafourche originates in Donaldsonville. As it meanders southward through Ascension, Assumption, and Lafourche parishes, it changes from a lazy, slow-moving stream surrounded by sugarcane fields to a widened, vibrant, and busy waterway before reaching Port Fourchon and the Gulf Coast. Due to its length and strategic location, Bayou Lafourche has long served as a main travel route for early Native Americans and European settlers as they moved up and down the bayou between the Mississippi and the Gulf. Often used as a point of reference, a given location was frequently referred to as up the bayou, down the bayou, or across the bayou. Eventually, farmers and fishermen created ribbon farms along both sides of the bayou as they built in neighborly fashion side by side. It is said that these close-knit communities could pass along news from neighbor to neighbor for a stretch of 40 miles without anyone leaving their front porch. This form of line settlement helped earn Bayou Lafourche its unique nickname as the longest street in the world. The story of Bayou Lafourche can best be told by recounting its long and colorful history, a history that winds through time like its waters wind through varied landscapes as forested banks in the upper bayou give way to rural towns, sugarcane farms, fishing boats and industry, to salt marsh at its mouth. In approximately 1200 AD, the Mississippi River flowed through multiple outlets to the Gulf. At that time, Bayou Lafourche was a main channel of the river. Gradually, over the next 2 centuries, the river changed its primary course eastward, leaving behind a smaller stream the local natives called Bayou, today's Bayou Lafourche.
Bayou Lafourche was once the main channel of the Mississippi River. There in southeast Louisiana, there's 7 different channels or delta complexes, they call them. Bayou Lafourche originally flowed, came up at Donaldsonville, and it made a big turn at Thibodaux, and it came into Terrebonne Parish first. Then this all silted up, and then it went down the Bayou Lafourche that we know that goes down through Galiana, Golden Meadow, and on down to Leeville.
And as the annual floods would come down the Mississippi River and flood into Bayou Lafourche, it brought enough sediments to actually build the natural levees along Bayou Lafourche, which provided the habitat for us humans to develop.
The first people of the bayou were the Chirimachas, Washas, Chawashas, and Homa natives. Mounds built by these indigenous cultures are still found in the area and are said to have been in existence for at least 4,000 years.
The prehistoric Indians were all over down here. We find evidence on all these bayous. Broken pottery, earthen mounds, shell mounds. Also, what's very interesting is they made some effigy mounds resembling certain animals or reptiles. These Indians down here, they're all part of the culture we call the mound builders.
Some of them are burial mounds, some of them are just mounds that they used just as mounds were built throughout time. You know, just with, if you were to dig, you'd find pottery shards, you'd find arrowheads. We had an issue with the oil and gas industry in which they were building a processing plant and came across a mound as well as some burial remains. And that was an issue that we had to deal with, finding some of our skeletal remains and just removing them in order for this processing plant to be built. And so we continue to struggle and to preserve our mounds, to preserve our burial sites, and it's always a challenge.
As a primary source of livelihood, these tribes depended upon Bayou Lafourche, area lakes, and uplands for hunting and fishing, often using hand-hewn dugout canoes.
Very early, the Indians, people of Indian descent, almost all of them were fishermen, particularly shell fishermen. There were very few that were farmers, and they fished oysters. And if you look at the prehistoric cultures, they fished oysters back then too.
We use the bayous today just as we have throughout our history. A lot of our people are fishermen, occupation they still do today. A lot of them are oystermen, trappers, and so we've learned to be at one, if you will, with the bayous and with our communities because we made our living from the bayous. We fished and sold our catches from the bayous as we do today. And so we've had a relationship with the bayou, if you will, throughout our history as a matter of survival.
You have to realize these are all hunters and gatherers. They're highly mobile. They basically move from one area to another area based on the hunting grounds. Most of these people use the bayou in the way that it was their lifeblood. It provided food and sustenance and things such as this.
The first European explorers of the lower Mississippi Delta were the Spanish, who arrived before 1520. At the time, Native Americans spoke openly of a fork in the river as another route to the Gulf. However, over time, this openness ceased, so later explorers thought the existence of Lafourche was a mere fable. In the 1680s, French explorers claimed the region for France and began colonizing the area. By 1700, these explorers located the fork, and after reaching the main Washoe village near present-day Labadeville, named the stream Lafourche de Chirimacha. The name was soon shortened to Lafourche, or simply the fork. By the mid-1700s, Spanish and French colonists established the first permanent European settlements. Within a few years, Acadians, exiled from Nova Scotia by the British, settled in the area.
The first Acadians don't really come into this area until around the early 1780s. Then by 1790, the whole area is settled pretty much down to Raceland and even possibly Rose.
By the late 1700s, German settlers established communities nearby.
It's very interesting, some of the names that we think of being Cajun but are actually German. Keep in mind that most of the records were kept by the church, and most of the church was Catholic and it was French.
In time, those who populated the Bayou Lafourche area included Native American, Spanish, French, Acadian, German, Canadian, English, African, Italian, as well as other ethnic settlers who all discovered a wealth of natural resources in the area.
It's a rich resource. I've often heard people say that you don't go hungry unless you're on a diet. It's truly so rich that the settlers could come and live a very good life with minimal effort. Because hard work, obviously, but you trapped, you fished, you hunt, you do a little farming, and it's a good life.
I think the reason that people settled also was just like any waterway. First of all, the land would be real fertile, so the crops would certainly, they'd have wonderful crops. Plus, it was just like living next to a highway. You have a waterway.
Oh, the bayou for the Acadians, the bayou for the sugar planters, the bayou for immigration into this area. It was the highway. It was the commercial lifeline of this parish. The Spanish considered this area much more productive than along the Mississippi River. They considered the lands here a lot richer.
It provided so much for them, aside from a mode of transportation, aside from building materials. I mean, you have cypress. That's most of the houses were built out of cypress. You also had food that was here. I mean, the bayou was plentiful, and certainly the game that would be found around here too to hunt. So it provided everything. I would imagine it would be everything you ever needed in one area.
Over the next 100 years, descendants of these diverse groups helped blend their distinct and fascinating mixture of cultural practices, customs, and heritages into a unique society generally known the world over as Cajun country.
Oh yeah, been born and raised on Bayou Lafourche. My dad had been raised around Jack Bay. My grandma used to own 2 little plantations there. We used to raise vegetables, beans, peas, and all. We used to make better garden in them days than you make it now. You never went hungry, but the only thing my daddy used to hunt like hell to find out something to eat. Deer, rabbit, squirrel. Used to catch goldfish, catfish. We used to eat good, you know. Daddy used to catch hog, but besides that, I didn't know what beef meat was. I had no money to buy them.
Early European settlers stayed close to Bayou Lafourche, but after Louisiana achieved statehood in 1812, many Anglo-Americans purchased land and small farms to create larger farms and plantations.
What happened was, most of the people that got into the sugar plantations were from the old southern colonies. Virginia on down, Virginia, the Carolinas, Georgia, South Carolina. And they brought the slaves. There were not many slaves here. The Acadians had none, they couldn't afford them. And then when they came in, they bought out the Acadian farms. And that's when the Acadians moved further down the bayou, and a lot of them went into the swamp area and started hunting and fishing, and all this.
Hundreds of years of flooding by the Mississippi had deposited rich sediment in the delta along Bayou Lafourche.
The bayou defined the landscape because the bayou at one time was the Mississippi River outlet. And the sediment and deposits that landed here in the area we call Lafourche and Terrebonne parishes and Ascension parishes made the land productive and rich in nutrients, and as a consequence sprouted a plantation economy that persists today.
My grandfather and my grandmother, they worked in the can field. They used to cut can at them times they didn't have no can cutting machine. You used to cut can by the ton. And when they pick it up, they were weighed in, and that's how I used to get paid. My daddy and my mama too, they grew right on Bayou Lafourche. I was born and raised on a sugarcane farm. Planted sugarcane, and when the grinding time came, I worked in a field hog can. It was pretty tough. I did it. Yes, indeed.
This rich land was an excellent location for growing indigo, cotton, corn, rice, peas, and sugarcane as commercial crops.
Production of sugarcane, I mean, it all depends on the climate. At first it didn't work. I mean, it was first grown in the 1700s. I think Iberville brought it from the West Indies, but over the years, different varieties, they realized that this was perfect soil down here. So it's been here for quite a long time.
The bayou provided an excellent means for transporting agriculture crops to market and for returning supplies to the area.
Well, the bayou definitely was your highway, and so goods and services came up through large barge boats.
You have transportation of goods as far as your sugarcane and any other goods that were needed on plantations, down to cloth and medicines. As important as just getting somewhere, it was extremely important for commerce too. It was the main artery. Without it, certainly you cut that off and you would have been cutting off a significant part of the livelihood out here.
The bayou also supplied fresh water from the Mississippi for irrigation of these crops and for drinking and consumption by the growing populations. Over the next 50 years, many magnificent plantation homes, sugar mills, churches, and public buildings were constructed in communities along the bayou.
Keep in mind, all these deltas I'll tell you about, the natural levees, good soil. Temperate or almost subtropical climate. This was ideal for growing sugarcane. They were growing some sugarcane, making syrup, but when they learned how to make sugar, things changed. It was the gold rush. Well, Louisiana was the richest state in the nation in 1850. New Orleans was the #1 port in the nation in 1850s because of sugar. Keep in mind, there were over 200 sugar plantations on Bayou Lafourche alone. So, so much was the impact upon the people who lived along the bayous, who mostly were farmers. They weren't rich, but they were comfortable. They got bought out. Well, it was a lot like the movies. It was real nice for the plantation owners. Life was very pleasant. Some of the bigger plantations was like a self-contained village. They didn't have to go anywhere. They even had furniture makers. You name it, it was there for that time. They had machine shops, blacksmith shop. They had a company store. One thing about it, though, they could not have had sugar plantations without the labor. And you can racialize and say, well, they were well treated and they were this and that, but you're not free. When you're not free, man, you take away everything. And these people were not free. Don't matter how comfortable they were. We know when we eat white, they had their own hospital. They were well cared for. They paid a lot of money for it and all, but they were not free. And they could not have accumulated all this wealth, made all that money without the slaves. They did play a major role in the development of the sugar economy.
Beginning in 1820, for about 30 years, steamboats made weekly runs to Bayou Lafourche from New Orleans. At the time, Donaldsonville was the shipping and commercial hub for the bayou. But after the railroad was constructed through Lafourche Crossing in 1854, the principal marketing, shipping, and commercial hub for the bayou shifted to Thibodaux.
If you go back and look at the history of Donaldsonville, it was a major port facility that basically used Bayou Lafourche for a shortcut to the Gulf and to New Orleans. They had major paddle boats, some up to 300 foot long on the bayou.
Oh, they carried everything. They carried produce. They would come down here, turn around in Thibodaux, right there on Jackson Street. They used to have a big turnaround area. They used to have circuses on steamboats. They used to have supermarkets and malls on steamboats. And so the steamboats would come up and down the bayou, and then they'd pick up sugar, they'd drop off passengers, they'd drop off merchandise, everything.
I mean, you could go anywhere in a steamboat. And this was the heyday of the romantic golden age of the Old South. And they were able to grow sugar, manufacture the sugar, and have it shipped right at their doorstep.
But after the train comes here in the area, now you have an interlude where the bayou now begins to focus on the train. They use the bayou to get to the train, to get to the city, to get their crops and make their visits.
Between April 1862 and May 1864, 20 major Civil War battles and hundreds of military engagements were fought on Louisiana soil.
Well, when you're dealing with Bayou Lafourche and the Civil War, the main thing is to keep in mind when you say how vital of a role. It played a very important role in relation to New Orleans because of the fact that this was a breadbasket. There was a tremendous amount of wealth here in this area in the form of sugar plantations. There were deposits in banks and things such as this. Thibodaux was a major center of commercial and economic development. And there was a lot of manpower along Bayou Lafourche in the form of potential recruits for the Confederacy. So to Louisiana, Bayou Lafourche was very important. In my own mind, I think it would have been extremely hard for Butler and Shepley and a lot of the military governors in New Orleans to maintain control over the Mississippi if they didn't have control over Bayou Lafourche. And that was one of the three legs of Lincoln's policy, was the control of the Mississippi. And they never would have gotten Port Hudson had they not taken Bayou Lafourche. So it was very important to Louisiana, extremely important.
At least 4 battles and many smaller skirmishes took place along Bayou Lafourche for its control.
Fort Butler was very important at the mouth of the bayou. But you have the battle at St. Emma Plantation, there's a Coke Plantation, then you have Georgia Landing, and then probably the biggest battle on Bayou Lafourche was the one at Lafourche Crossing, where you have in the neighborhood close to 200 to 300 Confederate troops facing around 1,000 Union Army soldiers. So most of the battles that took place on Bayou Lafourche were skirmishes. And the Union always had better trained soldiers. The Union always had more equipment, and they always had more men. And they had more determination because they came down both sides of Bayou Lafourche, and they used barges to get back and forth to fight their battles. And so they just overwhelmed Confederate defenders. But it was firepower. It was the ability of the Union Army to arrange more troops and more guns and more cannons that eventually spelled the defeat for the Confederates in the area.
In 1904, the established way of life along Bayou Lafourche and in the Barataria-Terrebonne estuary abruptly changed when the Atchafalaya and Lafourche Basin levee districts constructed a dam across the bayou's headwaters at Donaldsonville in order to prevent annual flooding.
What happened was, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, railroads were coming in, so they didn't need the waterway. And Bayou Lafourche was still connected to the Mississippi River, but it was flowing sluggishly, except during flood time. And in 1903, there was a crevasse just between E.D. White and Thibodeau at Waverly Plantation, where the levee broke and all that flooding. Well, after that, the people along Bayou Lafourche got together and built an earthen dam at Donaldsonville.
And so ever since then, the bayou has changed. Obviously, no longer can traffic go back and forth between there and New Orleans as it once did. Folks can no longer get all the way from the river down the bayou.
It's about a 600-foot plug that was put into the head of Bayou Lafourche just to keep the river from coming down.
Although the dam eliminated navigation from Bayou Lafourche into the Mississippi River, it did enable increased land development for residential, commercial, industrial, and agriculture activities, which generated millions of dollars in economic benefits for the area and its increasing population. But the effort to solve the problem of flooding for the Lafourche Basin created another problem just as dramatic.
The dam prevented the flooding that everybody was concerned about and complaining about. The opposite side of it, it totally blocked Bayou Lafourche off from a natural water source.
The dam severed the sustaining lifeblood that was necessary for the health of the wetlands served by the bayou. In effect, the damming of Bayou Lafourche began a long-term decline for the basin's wetlands that depended upon the replenishing sediment and nutrients supplied by annual floods.
The bayou is what originally built the Terrebonne Barataria basins. When it was cut off, it still carried 10 to 15% of the Mississippi River. So it was still carrying a lot of sediment and a lot of nutrients, still sustaining marsh, but at the same time still building marsh. When it was cut off, that source of water was lost, and those marshes began to die and fall back.
At the time the dam was constructed, plans were to install a set of locks to permit river water to enter the bayou.
The earthen dam was meant as a temporary measure while the state legislature wrangled to get the funds to put the locks in place.
But 50 years later, the locks still had not been built. Over that span of time, residents grew to believe that the bayou was no longer a significant stream. Without the rush of fresh water from the Mississippi River, Upper Bayou Lafourche quickly became a shallow, narrow, slow-moving stream that degenerated into a stagnant, unsanitary, and unsightly ditch choked with undergrowth, weeds, and trash.
Bayou Lafourche in the 40s was no more than a stagnant ditch. Back at that time, there was no municipal sewer systems. Everything drained into that, and it was really bad from what I understand.
Attempts were made to use pumps, siphons, and canals dug to nearby lakes in order to get fresh water into the bayou, but with negligible results. Meanwhile, thousands of residents were deprived of a constant source of fresh water for their domestic, industrial, and agricultural needs.
Long time ago, you remember that system you got in here? The water used to fall on the roof, we have got it, and we have a board on top to cover it. That's why we just drank our water. The rainwater, yeah, sugar hard water used to go in that bayou.
And it just overgrew until we started making improvements in 1955.
In 1955, and in response to public pressure, a control structure was built and pumps were installed at the site of the headwaters of Bayou Lafourche. The reintroduction of river water into the old bayou brought new life but did little to revitalize the stream that once carried up to an estimated 12% of the flow of the Mississippi River. Additional steps have been taken over recent years to increase the flow of water into Bayou Lafourche in attempts to keep up with the demand of population and industrial growth. Currently, about 1/4% of Mississippi River water flows down the bayou. The annual flow amounts to approximately 40 billion gallons of water. Of that, about 20 billion gallons are used for drinking and agricultural and industrial needs in Ascension, Assumption, Lafourche, and Terrebonne parishes.
We have basically two major industries that use water off of Bayou Lafourche. One is the sugar industry during the latter part of the year, and we also have Valentine Paper Company that uses a huge amount of water.
Not only do we service your regular residents and your businesses, but the predominant activity in the Gulf is at Port Fourchon. And Port Fourchon gets all of its water from us.
Today, Bayou Lafourche is the source of fresh drinking water for over 300,000 residents and oil field workers, and is also a hub of economic activity for the boat building industry, the port facility, and fishermen alike. Historically, man has made so many changes to Bayou Lafourche that it now faces some major challenges. The vast reduction of fresh water flow into the bayou over many years created a number of additional problems for the estuary.
Here's the problem. You saw where we discussed the 7 different deltas. Well, up until about 1950, southeast Louisiana was growing in size. And they levied off the Mississippi River and Bayou Lafourche, some of the other streams. And so then the Mississippi River could not run wild and free and continue building deltas. If they hadn't interfered, there would be a huge delta forming, huge land mass.
A lot of the things that humans have done to the system were first started at a time when we really didn't know the ramifications of what we were doing. But there was a time in our history where we did understand that we were causing damage, and yet because of political pressures basically is why we continue doing it.
Although various steps have been taken over the years to provide a renewed fresh water supply, the best of efforts have fallen far short of also permitting the bayou's wetland basin to sustain a healthy ecological balance.
See, it stands to reason that with all this silt coming down throughout all the geologic time, what happened to it? Southern Arkansas, there were some big mountains in Washington. Where did all that sediment go? This baby is 60,000 plus feet thick. This is the most awesome sedimentary basin on this planet. There's nothing like this.
Except for a major spring flood in 1927, only limited amounts of new sediments have been deposited in the area. Naturally, Louisiana's wetlands subside. Without new sediment, the wetlands continue to subside.
We've reduced the amount of fresh water flowing into the Barataria and the Terrebonne system, and we greatly upset the natural condition. Now we have subsidence, and we have no way of bringing in new sediments to offset that subsidence.
This subsidence has been further complicated by oil and gas extraction, which greatly increases its rate.
Fluid removal, fluid extraction has caused the crust of the earth to sink in some localities.
That only accelerated the process that's going on, and just how much longer will it continue to sink, we don't know.
Presently, Bayou Lafourche carries some sediment, but much of the needed heavier sediments drop out of the flow within a few miles of the pumping station in Donaldsonville. The result is that siltation occurs in the channel of the upper bayou instead of flowing to the coastal wetlands where it is most needed.
As everybody knows, the Mississippi River is heavy with sediment from up north. When we pump that sediment into Bayou Lafourche. The velocity in the bayou is such that it's not able to carry a heavy load, and it tends to fall out rather rapidly. So the upper reaches of the bayou has silted in over the last 40 years.
When the bayous form, they silt up from the river water. But after they're abandoned, they continue silting up.
There's a number of things that it's causing it, and a lot of it is just a sloughing off of the banks, I think, and a lot of the drainage over the years. You got to remember, you're talking about decades.
Yeah, the bayou's changing. Bayou ain't bigger like it was.
Now, the boat traffic going in and out of there would have kept that channel open because there was no more boat traffic. It was no longer in use.
For the past century, the restricted flow of fresh water into the estuary and subsequent land loss have also permitted greater saltwater encroachment into freshwater habitats.
The saltwater intrusion problems we have is created by the disintegration of the marsh. Way back when the Mississippi River would flood and would deposit all these sediments in the marsh along with fresh water and keep the marsh vital and healthy. Man in his infinite wisdom came along and channelized the river and basically cut that supply off.
Our system is broken down, if you look at it, into a band of freshwater marsh, intermediate, then brackish, and then saline marsh as you go towards the Gulf. And those are habitats that are in accordance with the salinities in those regions. And those salinities move in and out, up and down. But if we lose wetland systems to the south, lose the barrier islands and the saltwater marshes, then saltwater can intrude farther north. And when it gets into freshwater systems, this is where the problems occur.
In many cases, the dredging of canals for oil and gas exploration has contributed significant stress to the marshes adjacent to the bayou.
When we dredge canals for oil and gas exploration or for navigation, we're changing the way water naturally moves through the system. And we're creating straight conduits. Humans, when we dig canals, we dig them straight. Nature builds them in a very crooked S-shaped type system. So we allow saltwater to intrude much easier through such things as sustained southerly winds or even hurricanes. And they'll blow up salt water through these pipes we've created, these canals, into freshwater systems. And these freshwater systems cannot survive in saltwater conditions, so they die.
Such hydrologic modifications have provided open pathways for salt water to intrude into swamps and other freshwater habitats, thereby hastening vegetative death and erosion in areas along southern Bayou Lafourche.
Saltwater intrusion can have a devastating impact on the landscape if it's increased salt concentration in a very short period of time, especially in areas that are fresher in concentration, freshwater concentration. What will happen is there'll be large-scale impacts to the vegetative community, which then in turn will have devastating implications on the many different species that utilize those habitats.
We live in an estuary, and the salinities in an estuary change sometimes from hour to hour. So many of the creatures in an estuary, the plants, the animals, the marine life, have adapted to some changes in salinity. But you look in the upper part of the system and it's characterized by freshwater plants and animals.
As saltwater encroaches into fresher water habitats, freshwater plants just don't really have enough time to adjust and get into a more saline environment. It just turns into open water.
Things have changed so much. The saltwater wedge, or whatever you want to call it, that line, is a lot further inland today.
We have a set amount of fresh water that is coming from the north. And when the forces to the south of us change, we're losing land mass, then the fresh water coming from the top just cannot overcome the new strengthening forces from the Gulf. So we have salt water that's moving northward.
Currently, communities as far north as central Bayou Lafourche are experiencing saltwater encroachment, disrupting the intake of fresh water from the bayou for consumption and industrial use.
We had salt water recorded all the way up to the vicinity of the sugar mill in Raceland. That's a good 35, almost 40 miles upstream in Bayou Lafourche.
What's occurred with Bayou Lafourche being dammed up is that you're having not enough flow. We see tidal fluctuations in Bayou Lafourche right here. Tide goes up, tide goes down. We know that right here at our intakes, there was shrimp. And that leads to the point to where we've had a problem because of that. And we had an occasion where we had people in the southern part of the parish actually drink salt water.
This facility we have in Donaldsonville isn't capable of pumping enough water to hold back salt water, and it therefore got into the drinking water.
The people along Bayou Lafourche all depend on Bayou Lafourche for drinking water. And the industries along Bayou Lafourche depend on Bayou Lafourche for drinking water, but also for processed water. And the processes that these industries use depend on fresh water. They need fresh water to produce their various commodities. And in some cases, we've had great intrusions in that productivity in those industries. And that means jobs, that means impacts on our economy. Bayou Lafourche is one of the most important waterways within the Barataria-Terrebonne system.
Not only is this important to the parish, it's important to the state. if we don't do something, we need to start looking for another source of fresh water.
Over a number of years, Bayou Lafourche has faced other major challenges affecting water quality, caused by fecal coliform bacteria and nutrient and chemical runoff. As the population increased over the years, greater numbers of homes and businesses have been built along the bayou. While the larger incorporated communities now have municipal sewage systems, many of the smaller communities use individual treatment systems. In some instances, drain pipes from these improperly maintained systems discharge untreated waste directly into the bayou. These discharges place fecal bacteria and other pathogens into the primary source of fresh water for the basin, thereby contributing to potentially major health problems.
Some of the health problems that can occur from being exposed to these pollutants are, say, if people swim in the bayou, they're prone to be exposed to these fecal coliform bacteria, and it can cause diarrhea and illness.
But these discharges aren't the only problem. Drainage and runoff from urban streets, livestock, agricultural and lawn pesticides, herbicides, and chemical spills are all detrimental to the quality of water in Bayou Lafourche.
And this is called non-point source pollution. And each of those pollutants will have a different effect.
I always think about what's running into the water, what's going to eventually flow into the water, because it always affects humans, animals, and habitat.
Much of the direct impact from such pollutants has not yet been fully documented. However, some chemicals do contribute to eutrophication, often creating dead zones that occur in lakes and canals along the bayou as well as in the Gulf off the coast of the basin. Further, nutrients from fertilizers and sewage can result in surges in submerged aquatic growth, which restricts the ability to deliver water to the water plants.
On Bayou Lafourche, I think the biggest concern is with the submerged aquatic vegetation, the hydrilla and other plants like that tend to clog up the waterways. They impede navigation. There goes your recreational boating. You have problems with water intakes. You have problems with industry and drinking water.
We had hydrilla basically take over Bayou Lafourche, and it actually choked back the flow and held back water.
There's so much grass growing in hydrilla growing in Bayou Lafourche that you almost look like you can walk across it. I mean, that's how choked the bayou had gotten.
That's because you have invasive species on one hand, and then you have a lot of nutrients coming into the water body on the other. And so it causes these plants to grow pretty rapidly.
Some reports I've read, in warm water, perfect conditions, this stuff can grow a foot a day.
Invasive, non-native aquatic plants have overgrown large areas in the upper bayou that choke the flow of available fresh water.
With the aquatic plants, especially in Bayou Lafourche, we have a problem with kind of a sponge effect. A lot of aquatic weeds building up in a stream tend to back up the water and keep it from flowing properly.
And it has grown to the point where it is also causing problems with our ability to push water down to where it's needed for drinking water supplies, for example. And so that's become a real health issue.
Attempts to control such growth result in considerable expenditures of public monies.
We eventually hired a little tugboat to come in and chop a path through this to kind of open up the system. We also have 2 machines we lease from the Corps of Engineers, mechanical harvesters.
The economic impacts are huge. Even on Bayou Lafourche, which has a pretty limited economic resource, we spend a lot of money with fancy hydrilla harvesters and chemical sprayings of other noxious weeds. There was one study by Cornell University that approximated that throughout the United States we spend on the order of $120-something billion a year to combat invasive species.
In addition, persistent littering, dumping, lack of community pride, and personal accountability by unconcerned residents creates negative impressions for responsible citizens and tourists.
There's always been a dumping and littering problem in Bayou Lafourche. Way back before the parishes instituted garbage service, everybody that lives along the bayou just basically used the bayou side as a trash pile.
Littering is an issue that plagues all of us, and it's really hard to understand how people can just litter. And it's become something that has been ingrained in our heads that it's okay to do that. And the only way we're going to combat that realistically is to just bring it in people's consciousness that what they're doing is not right. And it just shows a lack of respect for our natural system. And it's totally an education thing. That's the only way we're going to be able to get over this. But it indicates, when we stop littering, it indicates that we've made headway and we've gotten to the consciousness of our population and made them understand that the environment is important.
Prior to the construction of South Louisiana's extensive levee system, Bayou Lafourche was a vital channel for Mississippi River water to flow into the coastal wetlands. It can be again. Reopening Bayou Lafourche as a carefully controlled distributary could transport fresh water down the bayou to wetland and coastline areas that are experiencing the highest rate of saltwater encroachment and land loss.
There's two things we've got to do. Naturally, we have to have hurricane protection, and that's to stop the storm surge, some kind of a levee, some kind of a structure. But keep in mind that we're sinking, and you don't want to be sitting behind a levee and with salt water all around you. No more freshwater marsh. So we got to keep building marshes. You got to have that, but it's got to be designed in such a way that we have hurricane protection, but just as important, we have to have coastal restoration. If we can figure out a way to divert Mississippi River water, let fresh water come in.
However, in doing so, there must be careful, systematic control of the amounts of fresh water placed into the estuary in order to prevent drastically changing the balance of the bayou's ecosystem and way of life for its residents.
To keep our ecosystem, you got to have freshwater swamp, freshwater marsh, freshwater lakes, brackish water lakes, brackish water marsh, and finally a salt marsh, and then the barrier islands. You don't have that, you don't have any shrimp, you don't have any oysters, you don't have the fish you're going to have. It takes that environment for all the brackish water species, even the saltwater species have to come in and out. So you got to have that and need the breeding grounds.
We depend on a saltwater and a brackish water and a freshwater band of systems, and it would be very easy for us to use fresh water at such a high degree that we could completely change our way of life. We know that the public doesn't support that. The public would not support a complete eradication of our way of life.
Presently, there are project studies underway that seek potential solutions to the problems facing Bayou Lafourche and its surrounding area. These projects aim to help return sediment and nutrient-rich waters to the Barataria-Terrebonne basins and reverse the trend of land loss that threatens lives and livelihoods in South Louisiana. One such project is the Bayou Lafourche Freshwater Diversion Project, also known as Mississippi River Water Reintroduction into Bayou Lafourche, aims to increase water flow in the bayou from its current flow of 200 cubic feet per second to approximately 1,000 cubic feet per second without increasing water levels. This project seeks to increase water flow that will nourish coastal marshes, help block saltwater encroachment, and provide additional freshwater supplies to residents along the bayou. Project plans call for dredging the upper bayou and installing a new pumping station in Donaldsonville to provide the needed increase in water flow.
It'll increase the amount of water in Bayou Lafourche. It'll help with the salinity problems down south. The main reason they're looking at it is for the nutrients in the water. It's high in a nitrogen compound. It acts as a fertilizer when it hits existing marshes to help reinvigorate those marshes, keep them from dying off.
What we're trying to do is mimic nature to get the fresh water, the nutrients, and the light sediment down to the marshes, and also to ensure a freshwater drinking source.
We expect an actual improvement in coliform levels, and the chloride levels are expected to be reduced. We need the fresh water to keep Bayou Lafourche as a freshwater drinking supply. We have no alternative.
Bayou Lafourche itself would be better off because you'd have a better quality of water in Bayou Lafourche. It would allow us to have a more consistent source of water, make it easier to treat, which would be more turbid, which would prevent algae blooms. It would help prevent the saltwater problems that's been occurring. It would probably help retard the hydrilla, which would allow the water to flow easier, which would allow, it would be better habitat for the native species. You'd see a big improvement in Bayou Lafourche if we could get more water down. I mean, from every aspect.
Other projects initiated to restore land loss near lower Bayou Lafourche are the Ridge Project and Pipeline Sediment Transport Delivery, or Pipeline Slurry.
The Ridge Project is a partnership with the Greater Lafourche Port Commission and the Barataria-Terrebonne National Estuary Program, where the idea was to take the excess dredge material that was available at the Greater Lafourche Port Commission at Port Fourchon and restore habitat north of the port. The idea behind that was to hydraulically dredge that material to a location and then mound it up in a certain geometry to create a ridge. After that, we were supposed to go in, and are going in at this time, to plant a number of different species of vegetation, including both grasses and woody plants. All that designed to improve habitat in that area.
We obviously need sediments to rebuild our coast. And if the sediments are not any longer in the water column, then what we have to do is look to the bottom. When we usually talk about pipeline slurry, we're talking about bringing in new sediments into the basin. You know, the Ridge Project moves sediments from inside the basin to another spot inside the basin. And we should always take advantage of dredging that is being done inside the system, and we should use that material beneficially. But no question, we need a net increase of sediment into the system. So that's why we are advocates of harvesting the bottom of the Mississippi and the Atchafalaya and bringing in those new sediments. And those are sediments that would normally be deposited inside our system now, except that we have built levees.
Regardless of the approach used, it will take years to correct the accumulated problems along the bayou that have been created over the past century. Steps must also be taken to better educate residents of the basin about the need to eliminate raw sewage, pesticides, discharges, runoff pollution, and farm drainage.
And most people should just be mindful that whatever they do on their land can end up in the water and end up causing some of these pollution problems.
A healthy bayou is possible if area residents will assume individual responsibility and accountability for the bayou and its resources. The significance of the Barataria-Terrebonne Bayou Lafourche region is recognized with its national estuary status. Through the efforts of the Barataria-Terrebonne National Estuary Program, known as BTNEP or BITNEP, the public is being educated about issues affecting the estuary and is assisting BITNEP in implementing solutions.
There's so much room for what people can do to help out this resource. From helping to work with our citizens' water quality monitoring program, that they can work with us to do vegetative plantings, to go out into the marsh and plant restored areas. Other ways that people can get involved is just being advocates for restoration, preservation, conservation. The way that we got to be designated a National Estuary Program is to be critically imperiled and of national significance. And people can remind their legislative delegation that we are of critical national importance and we are imperiled, and that hopefully they will work towards finding sustainable solutions for our problems.
It is essential that residents, governmental bodies, and industry work together with BITNEP to help protect Bayou Lafourche and the estuary. Actions must be taken to preserve the primary source of fresh water for all residents in the basin for generations to come. Development of better individual care is critical to the long-term health of the bayou.
The quality of the water is integral to that, and the resource is so intrinsically linked with the people, the culture, and the way of life. And directly related to that is the quality of the fishery. And the fishery and the resource down here is so integral to the way we live our lives, from what we put on the table to what we make a living with.
BITNEP is working with various members of its management conference, government agencies, non-government organizations, and citizens to develop long-term solutions that positively affect the bayou and the estuary in general. Specifically, it provides staff support and advisory capacity for existing heritage-based efforts and ecological restoration efforts with interactive community and business alliances. It can assist with the growth of nature-based economic development and tourism, and it can provide publications, demonstrations, and educational materials to bayou communities.
We do that in a lot of different ways, ranging from just having a lot of industry and a myriad of government agencies compose our 45-member management conference. All the stakeholders are represented, which is something unique to the National Estuary Program. The different levels of government that we work with are working really hard to get everything within their legislative mandates done. And they don't always have enough funding to do that, and they don't always have enough people to do that. And we provide a really great fallback mechanism for them to get things accomplished that otherwise they couldn't. We also work with the corporate side. They realize that they have a very vested interest in coastal Louisiana and that interest is critically imperiled. And so whatever assistance they can give to an organization like BITNEP that will go out and get on the ground things done and get the public energized and engaged and help to kickstart this process, they're more than willing to go out there and make that investment. We work with other agencies to help provide them with resources and people and volunteers and hours and time and a base of citizens who are engaged in the process and who just want to do something.
Also, BITNEP has created a large number of outreach programs for the public. One such public awareness program that has proven very successful has been the Paddle Bayou Lafourche event. Paddle Bayou Lafourche is part of a larger project called the Bayou Lafourche Initiative. The goal of the initiative is to reinstill Bayou residents with a sense of respect for this historically, economically, and ecologically important waterway, as well as to help unify the Bayou community. The paddling trip has been created as an innovative approach to engaging and educating residents and visitors about the Bayou. Beginning at the Bayou's origin in Donaldsonville, the 4-day expedition winds for 52 miles before reaching the town of Lockport. Participants pass scenic natural views, plantation homes, historic sites, sugarcane fields, and fascinating backyard views of the residents of the Bayou while enjoying the bonding, camaraderie, and sense of accomplishment that comes from going the distance. The goal of this journey is to cultivate a sense of respect for Bayou Lafourche so that it may be protected and treasured. Success is measured in the number of paddling participants each year, in the signs, food, music, and cheers offered by the Bayou residents to paddlers as the flotilla passes their homes, and in individual and collective public support that enhances the overall health of the Bayou.
Several years ago, the Estuary Program realized that we needed to do nothing less than change the way our residents view Bayou Lafourche. And so we conceived of an idea where we would hold a paddle trip as a showcase of what Bayou Lafourche is and to sow some seeds as to what Bayou Lafourche could be.
That has done so much to get people engaged in the idea that Bayou Lafourche is their resource. Not just the ditch you cross on the way to Walmart, not just their little piece of the bayou that passes right behind their house, but a broader thing that connects so many communities and so many people. And the paddle trip's gone a long way towards getting people to think regionally and to think of the bayou as the string that holds these communities together and to showcase it to these people who come from all over the country to paddle down the bayou and to get those people from the bayou back on the bayou.
It's a kinship. I think you build kinship with other people from all over, not just of Lafourche Parish, but surrounding parishes and surrounding states. And we had people from other countries that actually do the paddle trip. I think this is a wonderful opportunity, a wonderful family event.
We've encouraged the residents along Bayou Lafourche to showcase our culture. And so we've had people cooking for us and school kids coming out and people playing music on the side of the bayou. And it's been a huge success. And really, that's what it's all about. It's about our people and our way of life.
Any little stopping point that we usually go to, there's always an event there that people just open up their hearts to us. I can really say the Plaisance family above Raceland, they put on a party that was fantastic, and they do it again and again and again.
Anyone could come and enjoy themselves. We made them all kinds of good treats. We had white beans, fried fish, fried alligator, and we had a green salad and all the sweets they wanted to eat. That's what they like. Cajun food, yes, Cajun food.
I love the bayou so much. It's a part of our life. It's a lifeline. And since I work with children, I wanted to be able to bring that message and not let them forget. I guess in a basic sense, I'm trying to teach them how to be advocates for their own homeland.
Whenever you're paddling, you have so much to think about, and it's just like you glance here and you glance there, from this side to that side. There was really nothing that I necessarily hadn't seen. It was just that before I hadn't taken time to notice it and really look at it.
It's become very spiritual. It's hard to describe, it's put into words, because I think once you do it, you have more of a sense of ownership to your own community.
It's just an awesome experience that you just get to see all the wildlife and the plants and the water and everything. And you could feel one way about the bayou when like passing next to on a road, but whenever you actually paddle on it, it's just amazing to see everything, and you get a whole new perspective, a whole new experience, a whole new appreciation.
Environmental education is something that the estuary program completely believes in, and we spend time educating our adults now, and that is a more or less a short-term approach, but it's also important to look at the long term, and that means to educate our youth, to train the adults of tomorrow. That's also very important.
Because it is the thing that ties them not only to one another, not only to their community, but to their past. Bayou Lafourche has a tremendous, tremendous history, an incredible amount of wealth and power and resource richness, not just in economic terms, but in environmental terms. It was a resource that was absolutely teeming. And for kids to understand just how much has historically been cradled by this resource is absolutely critical to them, number one, caring about this resource and its health and its future, and two, caring about themselves and how they fit into a broader picture. Giving kids a sense of place is probably one of the most important things that you can do as an educator or as an educational organization, because it gives them a sense of who they are in a broader term, and it broadens their world from just their little backyard to something broader. And if they're connected to something bigger, then surely there must be something bigger beyond that. And it's just great to grow their horizons like that.
These waterways hold enormous amounts of history, and they're culturally, historically, and biologically very important. And so, to bring people back to the bayou, we're going to create a sense of protection. And that's really what we're trying to do. It's very simple, but I think it's been very effective.
And it's bared out tremendously. And you see people cleaning up their backyards like never before.
It's just like as we were paddling down the bayou, you'd get really beautiful areas, and then other areas would be like, what are these people thinking? And I think that if they'd be on the paddle trip and they'd see how beautiful the area was, that they think differently about the bayou, that it's not a great big trash can or any place that you could dump your things that you don't need, that this is important and you need to take care of it.
I have battled just environmental cleanup my whole career, and you see trash dumps along the banks of Bayou Lafourche. And I firmly believe that the only way you're going to change that is to mount a campaign, and the campaign is very big in scope, and it's multifaceted. And I think one of the principal ways is just to bring people out to the system that you're trying to fix, to get them out into nature, feel it, and get on it, like Bayou Lafourche, paddle it, and make them understand and actually change the way they think, experience the people, bring in people from outside, and depend on our own people's feelings of we have visitors coming and we need to clean up. When we, who take advantage and take it for granted, what we have, understand that people from outside come here because we have things that other places don't, then that causes us to feel like we are important and that we have something of value, and we become better stewards. And that was the whole idea behind the Bayou Lafourche paddle trip.
It has definitely changed my life, because my life revolves around something different now. Before it was just something that I saw, and now the bayou is something that I live with. It's the land that I love.
It is a reality that people will protect that which they love and appreciate. Therefore, it is desired that participants of Paddle Bayou Lafourche will gain a greater sense of pride and stewardship for the unique treasure this area possesses. The intent is that efforts put forth by paddlers and land-based supporters will clearly demonstrate solidarity toward restoration of this beleaguered bayou and its surrounding wetlands.
The bayou represents the whole estuarine gradient. It's the total package from straight up fresh water where you get that brackish mix, and then all the way to straight salt water, salt marsh around the mouth of the bayou. So you get the maximum amount of biodiversity in this one representative slice.
Estuaries are normally places of great change, but the changes are being rapidly increased by human influences. And there's no place that is undergoing the magnitude and a high degree of change comparable to what we're experiencing now.
And as we can see, the bayou and the feeding of sediment out and the building of a delta and the building of land is critical to our survival. It just keeps coming up. So we can't afford to let the people in this area or the whole country not understand what these little bayous mean.
Making positive environmental changes ultimately comes from public awareness of problems facing not only Bayou Lafourche, but the entire estuary. Such awareness stimulates personal responsibility that helps generate public support for solving such problems.
Making people aware of those impacts and how important the commerce and what we serve to the rest of the nation would be extremely significant. Even if you are not aware of the environmental significance, this is a huge area where goods and services still come into this country. Bayou Lafourche plays an integral role in not just the ecosystem and the resource and the seafood and that kind of industry, but also the oil and gas. A lot of it comes up through here. If that's damaged and not taken care of, the long-term effects will affect the entire country.
Bayou Lafourche comes right down the center of the Barataria-Terrebonne National Estuary. This place is a national estuary because of its national significance. And very much so, people of the rest of the nation are being affected by these changes. Oil and gas production is greatly being affected when the water plants are delivering water that is too salty even to use to mix drilling muds. Then the rest of the nation feels it.
What we wanted to do was to get people understanding how significant that bayou was to the past and then now and the future, because we feel strongly that without the understanding of what that bayou has meant and how it enabled the culture to stay so true to its ties and stay so unique was really important to the preservation of the culture and the resource.
Our people are completely tied into our surroundings. We are bayou people. The whole region, we depend on our bayou, perhaps more so than most people in other coastal areas. Our waterways are important to our lifestyle. We have depended on our bayous, our wetlands, since first human settlements, and we still do, and that's very unique. There are a lot of places around the world and in the country that do not have this strong link and strong tie to their surroundings. They've lost that. We've retained it because our people have stayed here for generations. We don't move away, and so we've retained that unique link to our system. It's our home.
And it is just a great place to grow up. I can't imagine ever being from anywhere other than here. Just to know that you're part of something bigger, that what's behind your house stretches for over 100 miles and ties together people as diverse as you will ever find anywhere in the world. It's a big connective thing.
It's the accents, the way people talk down here, and the things that they say and the expressions that they say. It's the livelihood, it's the different parties, and that all comes from what was handed through very rough times. And they're just products of what happened over the years of immigration, the influx of different ethnic groups.
Hard times builds character, and I think that's what made it great culture. These were special people.
What's most fascinating to me is the culture that comes from everything that this bayou represents. Very important bayou.
The delta that this bayou has built when it was the main channel of the Mississippi River is one of the largest. If you look at a satellite map, you'll see that Bayou Lafourche Ridge is extremely significant. So you have people who have settled here for thousands of years, starting back to the different Native American tribes, ranging all the way forward to people who are just moving here for the first time now. And so you have this tremendous history, this cultural history. And that bayou is what tied it all together, because that was the original highway. Today, the highways that run parallel to the bayou are the main ones, LA1 and 308. And it's no surprise and no accident that they do run right alongside the bayou, because that's the historic pathway.
The way we have thought of Bayou Lafourche has changed over time. And it seems like those changes have occurred along with the modifications, the human changes that we've made on Bayou Lafourche. It's turned from 2,000 years ago, it was the Mississippi River, to gradually becoming a much smaller stream and less important as far as a stream on which commerce took place. Bayou Lafourche was the main corridor for commerce to this whole region. And we've just lost the history in our minds of what Bayou Lafourche was. And so we've seen just an overall less respect for Bayou Lafourche.
So you see the character of the bayou change. And especially, I mean, you go down the bayou and you get to the top of the Leeville Bridge when you cross over the bayou, and there's nothing left out there. And I mean, I shouldn't be able to see geologic change is the point. You know, when going all the way down the bayou was such a treat as a little girl. There was something very special about that. But now, to have this change from such optimism to being so imperiled and having to be so aware that we're so imperiled is, it's different. It's a distinct experience, and it's a very different experience than it was when I was a kid. I can tell you that.
This was a miraculous place before it vanished. Before we had so much wildlife, and just the shrimp, oysters, and crabs and crawfish alone. It's a very delicate ecosystem, and we're losing it.
To lose these wetlands is to lose this area's culture. Consequently, individuals, government, and industry must unite to prevent such a tragic loss.
This is a national treasure, and we need to do everything that we can to keep it here as long as possible.
And I wouldn't want to live anywhere where there weren't fishermen, you know? These are the salt of the earth. You go in a fisherman's cabin, you know, and they've got that St. Christopher medal, you know? I hate to see all this vanish.
Unfortunately, with coastal erosion comes an erosion of our culture, an erosion of our heritage, an erosion of our traditional plants that's on the land. And so we have major concerns with coastal erosion and coastal restoration so that we can maintain our identity and we don't lose our lifestyle as well as our culture and our heritage.
I guess that's what people don't understand. By losing our land, we're losing our culture and our heritage. At some point, we have to say, okay, stop. What can we save? What can we leave for our kids?
Man, I'd love for my great-grandchildren to be out and go out and catch all the trout they wanted, you know, like we did, and have shrimp and crawfish and oysters. So that's what we're losing, not only our physical things, houses and things like that, but if we don't preserve, we're going to lose our culture. And let me tell you something, South Louisiana is pretty unique. There's no place like this. You know, and and I love it. I love it here.
Destruction of our environment does not usually occur in magnificent waves. It is damaged a little at a time, over millions of acres, by careless acts of millions of people. It cannot be saved just by heroic feats of giant technology, but instead by millions of small acts and restraints, conditioned by small fidelities, skills, and desires. Environmental misuse is ultimately a cultural problem, one that can only be solved by cultural solutions.
Everything on earth has a purpose. Every disease, an herb to cure it. And every person, a mission. This is the Indian theory of existence.
So, as individuals, we must not take this responsibility lightly. The earth we abuse today, in the end, will take its revenge. For in exploiting its presence, we are diminishing our future.
Si j'ai une belle ici, belle, c'est par rapport à toi, belle. Mais je suis une belle ici, belle, c'est par rapport à toi, belle. Je pris un char ici, belle, pour m'en aller au Texas, belle. J'ai pris un char ici, belle, pour m'en aller au Texas, belle. Il y avait juste 3 jours, belle, que j'étais là-bas, belle. J'ai reçu une lettre de toi, belle, que t'étais bien malade, belle. Que t'étais bien malade, belle, en danger de mourir, belle. Que t'étais bien malade, belle, en danger de mourir, belle. J'ai pris son char encore, belle, pour m'en revenir ici, belle. J'ai pris son char encore, belle, pour m'en revenir ici, belle. Quand j'arriverai à toi, belle, tâter sans connaissance, belle. Quand j'arriverai à toi, belle, tâter sans connaissance, belle. Je m'en tournais d'abord, belle, m'en ai tourné là-bas, belle. Je m'en tournais d'abord, belle, m'en ai tourné là-bas, belle. Je me potiquais mon cheval, belle, pour te sauver la vie, belle. Je me potiquais mon cheval, belle, pour te sauver la vie, belle. Oh, si je puis aimer, belle, c'est pas t'avoir aimé, belle. Oh, si je puis aimer, belle, c'est pas t'avoir aimé, belle. Se pardonner, c'est dur, belle, mais oublier, c'est long, belle. Se pardonner, c'est dur, belle, mais oublier, c'est long, belle.